Hey boys and girls, welcome back to the Firefighters podcast. Now, I don't like playing favourites on the Firefighters podcast, but today, as I listened back to the recording, it has been one of my favourite episodes to put together. I am joined by my guest today, Dan Melia. Dan is a former member of FDNY Fire Department, New York, and Dan was in the fire department for 35 years. I think Dan is one of the most experienced individuals we've ever had on the podcast. And today, he really demonstrates how that career has helped him in his role of firefighter, company officer, chief officer, safety officer, and now in his role with PBI, he's able to ensure that firefighters all over the world are able to go about their operational role with the very best protection in place to protect them when they're out there on the front line, kicking ass and taking names. Now, before we get in there with Dan, let's hear from the wider podcast family. With our first sponsor today is, of course, the fantastic William Wood Watches. William Wood Watches is a UK-based watch manufacturer where upcycling is taken to a whole new level. William Wood are all about history on your wrist and feeling the beat of the fire service with you every step of the way. William Wood Watches has the vision to be the leading sustainable watch brand that upcycles rescue service materials for a new life, once forgotten, now reborn. So get over, have a look, get yourself registered, and check out some of the incredible stuff at williamwoodwatches.com. PBI Performance Products. PBI products are protection without compromise. Now, PBI fabrics have been renowned for their unique combination of flame resistance, durability, and comfort. I have worn PBI products since starting my career 13 years now, and they are the very first choice in protection for pretty much every extreme condition, from NASA astronauts to emergency responders, the military, Formula One. The business opened up in 1984, and they have created a legacy of protection that is recognized all over the world. We are so privileged to have them as a sponsor on the podcast. If you want to hear more about it, go over to pbiproducts.com or just check in the notes below. You will find a link to PBI.
Good morning.
Dan, good morning, sir. How are you?
Good. I'm doing well. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's a lot easier doing it this way. I've been on some Zoom calls when no one's on there, and it's just like you're talking to the wall. So this will be easy.
Love it. Dan Melia, welcome to the Firefighters podcast. How are we doing, brother?
Very well. Thank you, Peter.
It's a pleasure to have you from across the pond joining us here in the UK. I wanted to get you on because we've obviously come together through some mutual friends, through the work that you now do. But I wanted to take us back because you've had a really crazy and awesome career from, firefighter to company officer to chief officer into the work that you do now. So people that hear your voice will already be familiar with a lot of the work that you do. But for anybody that's unfamiliar with you, give us that 30-second soundbite, who you are and where you're joining us from today.
Okay, basically, I was a New York City firefighter for 35 years. I retired as a safety chief, and my career spanned from 1981 to 2016. I've been through a lot. I learned a lot. I saw a lot. And I'm on here today because I thought it'd be a good idea to share some of my experiences with you.
35 years. 1981. Jesus, my man. That is something that's quite incomprehensible for people that are even 10 or 15, because we look at careers now. Some people don't stay in the job as long as they used to. We look at people doing 10, 15 years now, but 35 years back then. Do you think it was more of a common thing that because people were so eager to get into the fire department, do you think it was always a job that once you were in, people were going to stay with it for life? Did you always want to be in the fire department?
Well, I kind of followed in the steps of my father, who was a deputy chief in the FDNY. I think he got on in 1947 and retired in 1978. So he only did 30 years. So I always used to break his chops a little bit. Like, you only did 30 years. So I think like 30
he obviously
years.
Wasn't committed. He just didn't want it enough. He didn't love it enough. That's okay.
Exactly.
We're not going to judge him. We're not going to judge him, but clearly he wasn't committed.
Exactly. I think back then, like 30 to 35 years, the average. I mean, at the FDNY, you can retire for 20 years. Most firefighters like their job so much, they just want to keep going and going. In fact, I had a knee injury that kind of knocked me out of the job, and they weren't going to put me back to full duty. So I kind of put my papers in back in 2016. I had a complete knee replacement. Yeah. So, but it's doing well now. I'm able to ride a bike. I can't run, but at my age, I don't know if I want to run anymore.
No, it's a lot of impact. How did you injure your knee?
It was several times over my career, but the last time I was a safety chief, and safety chiefs are supposed to be safe, but I went into a building to check the stability. The stairway wound up collapsing. I went down in a heap, so it's a little bit embarrassing as a safety chief to get injured, but we were looking to do final extinguishment after a fire. It was like third or fourth alarm, I forget at the time now. But we had a lot of resources, and we didn't want to send them back in until we deemed it safe. So after they carried me out, we figured we better not go in there.
you clearly demonstrated that safety wasn't quite where it needed to be. Speaking about your dad, him being in for 30 years, how did that feel, knowing you were going into this long line, and you say you finished as a deputy chief, so he clearly had a great deal of success in his career. Obviously it motivated you to go in it a little bit. Did you always know you were going to go all the way to operate as the chief for FDNY, or did you just want to go into it because it was a passion that your family had always done?
Well, it's hard to say, but basically, I had graduated high school. I went on to college. I got a 4-year degree. One time I was home from break, my father brought home the application. It's a civil service exam.
Oh, really?
He said, "Here, you and your brother might want to fill this out." There were 7 kids in my family, but 2 of us were eligible to take that test at the time. I think you have to be 21 to take it.
You had 6 siblings?
Yes, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Only 2 of us became firefighters.
That's
I'm
intense.
School teacher,
All brothers or sisters, or?
It was a basketball team of brothers and 2 cheerleaders, my 2 sisters. So 5 and 2.
So it was the 5 of you, and just 2 of you decided to go for the fire. But was your brother older or younger that also went?
He's younger than me.
Okay.
He's also retired now. Yeah, he did about 25 years. He had some heart issues that he had to get out eventually. I always say fire service is a young man's job. Carrying all that equipment, everything is, takes a toll on you. You got to stay in shape. You got to
Back then as well, speaking to firefighters, that I know that have been in sort of 25, 30 years, and you sort of alluded to it in the rough nature of how we went about the job back then. It was a lot more get the job done, and manual handling and all this sort of stuff wasn't quite where it needed to be. And we were, even in terms of the chemical exposure that we were putting ourselves through, none of it was malicious, but we just didn't know. We didn't know what we were doing sometimes, and we were just trying to do the best we could with the tools we had at the time. But I know it did lead to, and it has led to, a lot of issues for some people as they go into the later stages of their career. But things have come a long way now.
They've come a long way, but I think what's burning nowadays and the cancers, there's firefighters from my generation that were getting cancers, but now there's firefighters with 8, 9, 10 years getting cancer. And I think the fire service is addressing it with better mask policies, with cleaning the gear, et cetera, et cetera. But, the modern day fires now are a lot different than the wood burning fires from years and years ago. The modern content's horrible stuff.
Yeah, when a lot of manufacturing and a lot of industry started going through different variations of, hybrid materials and different composites and the different fabrics and all this sort of stuff, when you set that stuff on, it might seem fairly innocuous and fairly safe when it's in its designed state, but when you set fire to it, there's some pretty nasty toxic stuff. And yeah, like you say, the people on the front line are the ones that are paying the price for the knowledge that we've now learnt, and it's been a tough lesson to learn, I suppose. And imagine going through from firefighter all the way to chief. Has that given you a different lens between how you see firefighters on the front line and how, yes, they're excitable, yes, they're interested, yes, they love the job, but has it made you feel different? That sort of seeing things from experience now, did you look at it differently about what people are doing and whether or not we should be doing it in a different way?
Yeah, absolutely. When I first was a firefighter, I really didn't think about my safety the way I should have. I did my first 2 or 3 years learning from people. I had certain mentors. I had a lot of seasoned officers and tremendous amount of responsibility. I had 8 years on a job, and now I had these 3 or 4 or 5 other members that I was responsible for them to go home to their family at the end of the tour. Same thing as captain. And then as chief was probably the biggest change, because now I had 25, I don't know how I want to describe them. Sometimes when I teach some classes, I say 25 maniacs. But I say that in a good way.
No, I'm the same.
Maniacs being firefighters who are aggressive, they want to get the job done, and they're willing to take chances. But at that time, I'm responsible for them and where they're going to be and what they're going to do, when it's time to go in, when it's time to get out, et cetera, et cetera. And I felt that more as a chief officer than any other time.
Do you think sometimes there's a real balance to be had when you reach that sort of position in your leadership role? You don't want to suppress that energy. You don't want to stop people from being that excited and that engaged in the job. But you're right, it's kind of like got these maniacs on a leash, maybe. And we're not trying to be derogatory to other firefighters, but if we lose that passion, we lose the best part of the job. We lose that desire to run towards the danger when other people are running away. But it must have been hard tempering yourself. You say when you stepped up to become, I'm assuming, a battalion chief and sort of in charge of 20 to 25 personnel. How did that change your perspective of speaking with the team, being a consummate professional in terms of how you operate, knowing the procedures, knowing how to do the job? And then when you get to that level, battalion chief, it becomes a lot more about your communication style, your ability to build rapport, your ability to embody somebody else's values with the way you communicate to them. And some people struggle with that transition because not all great firefighters become great chiefs. How did you navigate that? And were there any lessons that you sort of took from your dad or maybe mentors around you?
I think, number one, especially in the fire services, you treat everybody else with respect. So I respected the officers, and I also took the time to get to know them. I'd go visit them at quarters, sit down, have a cup of coffee with them, and find out, ask him. Like I had one officer, the new guy came into the firehouse. He said, "So, where you from? What's your family like? What'd you do before this?" And just that kind of rapport, you develop that, and I think that was key to knowing the personnel under you, what they could do, what they can't do. Not everyone's going to be the best firefighter, but everybody has to do the job, and you know. From being a firefighter, that teamwork is essential, probably the most important thing that we have. And if you could be the greatest firefighter in the world, but if you don't have a nozzle team on the fire floor putting that fire out, you can't really get above that fire to search for any victims.
And not everybody can want to climb the corporate ladder as well. You've got to have that respect irrespective of rank, because there's always going to need to be the guy on the pump. There's always going to need to be the driver, the pump guy, the guy breaking and breaching or something like that. And these roles are not necessarily relative to the level of respect that you need to give to everybody. But that can be tough for some people because, we look at rank and sometimes we think it walks hand in hand with respect. I see, especially now, that there's a lot of encouragement for people to go for promotion. I always think development is a strange one, because development for me is lateral. It's not just vertical. Some people look at development and they're like, oh, well, you need to follow in Dan's footsteps and you need to get promoted. Whereas firefighters can become incredible at so many different aspects of their role, even if they don't want to, go up in the ranks.
I agree with you 100%. In fact, my theory is that firefighters are the backbone of the fire service. The chiefs don't go put the fires out. The firefighters do the job. The firefighters are doing the extrications. The firefighters are doing the confined space rescues. And some people they want to be a firefighter. They don't want to go up the ladder, So I chose to go up the ladder. I have other friends of mine who I consider much better firefighters than me, who've stayed as firefighters, and they do their job, and then they kind of mentor and teach the young firefighters. I learned more from the senior firefighters in my first couple of companies than I did from any officer, because that's where I think that the job is learned.
I totally agree with you. I think similar to how the podcast sort of came about, I realized quite some time ago that I actually love the people more than I love the job. Now, I love the emergency services. I love anybody that has that willingness and that desire to use their skill set to protect the community and to be part of something greater than themselves. But I realized I love the people. I love the people more than the job. And the job can change and the job can evolve. But unless you want to champion those people around you, they're not there to serve you. You're there to serve them. And that was a really difficult mindset for people to shift through. How did you know that you wanted to take on that role? How did you know that you wanted to be a leader within the department?
I guess, part of it was I saw my father go up the ranks and how proud I was of him as a little kid watching. We'd always go with the 7 kids. My mother would drag us to the promotion ceremonies when he made lieutenant the year I was born, and then he made captain, and then he made battalion chief, then he made deputy chief. So watching him, here's a guy that never graduated high school, joined the Navy the day after Pearl Harbor. He would have joined the Marine Corps, but his father wouldn't sign a paper because he was only 17. I think he had to be 18 to be in the Marine Corps. Did his tours in the South Pacific in the Navy, came back, was activated for the Korean War, and meanwhile he started having children in 1950 or 51 and wound up having 7 kids. I think my last brother was born in 1972, so it was a large span. In fact, the joke in the family was that maybe my sister was the mother, and she had gone away to college, and all of a sudden we had another baby. But that wasn't the case.
No, but it was clearly a passionate, loving family. I mean, 7 kids. You've got to be there's got to be a lot of love, a lot of passion in that family, and especially because you and your brother both wanted to follow in that footsteps. So there was clearly a lot of admiration for what your dad did. He clearly set a good example in some way.
Yes, yeah, he did, and you look at it and you see your friends' fathers when you're growing up. You see your friends' fathers. The one guy, he might be a lawyer and he's working like 15 hours a day, and then you see the other friend, father, who's a construction worker, and he comes home exhausted all the time. then you see my dad, who, you'd go in for your shift and come home. I mean, my father was there during the war years. I'd say from like 66 to like 1980, when New York City was really burned down. I mean, I went to work with him one time as a kid, and I went to the firehouse. I think we had to go buy a tent to go camping. When you have 7 kids, you don't go to the Bahamas or Atlantis. You go camping upstate New York. So, which I was fine with. I went to the firehouse, and I couldn't believe how busy they were. And even like when I was going to get on a job, I said to my dad, "You think I could do this?" He goes, "Hey, yeah, no problem. You'll be fine."
Yeah, I love that, and I think the same when you talk about, every job's important, and I respect all my daughter's friends, her parents do different things, but there's an immense amount of pride you have when you have a parent, man or woman, who's a paramedic or who's part of the emergency services in some way. It really does set them apart from the rest of your friends. It's a very, very surreal thing to have a mom or a dad, and it's an episode I really want to do. I want to have some kids on who are like 10, 12 years of age, whose mom or dad are in the fire department or in the police. I think that would make for a great one. Did he leave a year or two before you started? You never actually served with your dad?
No, we didn't. He left in 1978, and he had something wrong with his leg, and they weren't going to put him back to full duty. So he said, okay, "Well, I'm not going to go back to the firehouse. I'm going to put my paper and retire." And he actually sold his house on Long Island, moved down to Florida right away, and he lived in a community with like 5 or 6 or 7 other great friends from the FDNY, and they used to go. They had a ball down there.
So they're still living the lifestyle even as it is now.
Yeah, but my dad passed away, I think, about 7 years ago. So he actually collected his pension more years than he actually was on the fire department. So
really?
He retired at 55. He died about 88. So 33 years he collected his pension. That's the goal. And
he did it well. He did it well. It's great that he was able to enjoy that. So take us back to basic training. I know I don't want to go too deep into it, but back then it must have been, I hear some of the stories from people that went through training in the 80s, and it was great by the sounds of it. How did you enjoy your basic training?
I enjoyed it. Yeah, I just got out of college. I was working a job, and I got called for the fire department, and I went to get sworn in, and I said, okay. And I told my boss I was working for the time, I said, "Can you hold my job? I'm not sure. I went to college, and maybe I want to do something different." So after the first day, I went to the academy, and we marched around a little bit, and I called my boss and said, you can post my job. I'll be staying with these folks. Yeah. So at the time when I went, it was only 6 weeks. So
really? 6 weeks, and you were operational. Wow.
Then they sent you out to the firehouse. I guess at that time you learned more.
I was about to say, I think mentoring was a lot stronger then. You'd be put with like the old hand on the watch, and there'd be a lot more on the job training. I think now, and you'll know better than me, but I think now we're petrified of people hurting themselves on the job, so we tend to leave them in training school for a lot longer. Whereas back then, if you could run some hose out and you could be a useful pair of hands on the incident ground, then they'd get you on the pump. Yeah,
yes. And also now, probably over where you are in the UK and where we are, is a lot of the training they go through is mandated by law. And changes were made probably because firefighters might have gotten killed. So they changed the law. So if you want to be a firefighter one, you have to have hazmat, you have to have this, you have to have that. I mean, basically they taught us how to do the mask. We stretched some hose lines. We did some life-saving drills. I mean, we used to have a scaling ladder, and you weren't afraid of heights. You have to climb to the top, click on with the safety belt, and then go back and do like an arc and lean as far back, just so you would learn to trust your equipment.
So you have to look over. We used to look over our shoulder and try and read something on the ground, just so you weren't petrified. So we'd go up, we'd take a leg lock. We wouldn't even clip on. We'd leg lock, lean back, look over your shoulder, and they'd hold up a piece of paper, and you'd have to phonetically read it out. Yeah, like Alpha, Bravo, Delta, X-ray, whatever, just to show that you weren't petrified up there.
Interesting. So now, like the Fire Academy at the FDNY, it's 18 weeks long.
Wow.
And then 18 weeks, and then you come, and then you get sent out to the field. And
18 weeks.
It's a long time. And
it is a long time.
A lot of physical fitness training. A lot of physical fitness training during it, and stretching lines, going into some live fires. So
what was the fitness like when you joined? Did you have to pass any physical testing?
Well, when I got on, you had to take the written test. And then they had a physical test, which was challenged in the courts over the years, and it was an obstacle course. You had to do a broad jump. You had to do a hand squeeze on a vice grip.
Yeah.
You had to do a crawl through a tunnel. One of the things you had to do was do an arm hang. You had to last at least a minute on an arm hang while your arm fully extending. And when you got graded, And the last thing he did was he had to run a mile for time. Then they would compile the statistics. They also had to do a ledge walk where you put a mask on your back and you walk along a ledge, and you had to go back and forth. And the quicker you did it, the more you'd score. If you fell off twice, they give you 2 chances. If you fell off twice, you got a 0 for that part of it. So,
an edge walk. Man, that's crazy. Imagine that they thought, oh, this is an expectation. You might need to do an edge walk. Operationally, we might need you to walk. That is mad. I love you had to do a hang for a minute in case we need you to do it on the job. That's awesome.
So I think they were trying to simulate different tasks, but then the next test that they devised after the course throughout the test that I was on, and there was a long delay in hiring off of that list. They did a test that was more job related. You took a sledgehammer, you had to hit a tie a certain amount of feet, and you had to complete all the tests. Back when I went on, I was in a class of 300.
300 recruits.
300 firefighters. In New York City, we have 11,500 firefighters, which is hard to.
11,000. What is that? Is that today's numbers? Or roughly, when you...
Yeah, that's today's numbers. That then was probably pretty much so. It might have even been a little less. So you think about...
We've got 600 in my brigade, 600 operational personnel. Right. Again, our population is substantially less, but it's as is a big city. I mean, we're nowhere near, but 11,000. That's just... Sorry, I interrupt you, but that is just boggling. That's crazy.
No, it is mind-boggling. and for the year I got on, because there was a court case against the list because they didn't think it was appropriate. We had 300 in July, 300 in September, 300 in November. That was my class. 300 in January. So imagine the people at the training academy trying to put 300 people through at a time, and then had 1,200 firefighters. So there's 8,500 firefighters, and then a fourth of the brigade, is brand spanking new. Everyone's walking around. The Probies, you have a pumpkin patch. You get an orange.
Yeah, you get orange dots. Yeah. We still have that. We have little orange dots on the side of our helmets, so the Probie.
Well, we have on your helmet. It says probationary firefighter, and it's orange, so everyone knows that. When you look at the guy, you say, "Do this," and you say, "Oh, it's only the Probie."
You know what?
We call them Probie.
A couple of years ago, we actually had them taken off because, and this is how ridiculous. I'm not going to get into it too much, but it's how ridiculous it got because people were like, "Well, that's not fair," because people are looking at them like they're not the same as everybody else. They don't get, and they're not. We're doing that for their safety. I don't want to turn around to somebody and go, right, get a set on. You're going in as the team leader for a bit. They can't be a team leader. Do you know what I mean? Because they've not got the level of experience, with all due respect. And if I put them in that position, and if I say that to them, and they don't feel brave enough to challenge me, they'll just go, yeah, boss, I'll just stick a set on. If they go in there and die, we need this. It's for their own safety, but we have put them back on. But and we talk about how things get a little bit crazy sometimes. People are like, no, everyone should look the same. I'm like, well, they shouldn't though, should they? Because how am I going to know that's a development firefighter?
No, I agree with you. The Probie is the Probie. And we take great measures to protect that Probie at all costs. You never send them any place alone. You go with them. As a firefighter, you knew that. As a lieutenant, as a captain, you knew that's my Probie, and you took pride in training that person. And there's reasons for it, because you don't.
And for me as well, I also look at I'm sure you're the same. You look after the Probie as well, as in if there's another station or there's another watch, and you don't let them play jokes on your Probie. Or I was like, no, this is our Probie. We'll mess about with our Probie, but no one else is going to mess about with them because that's not fair. This is our person. We're going to look after them. We'll develop them in our way. So they're not there to be abused. They're not there to be bullied or anything like that. They're there to learn, and we're there to look after them. But you don't want to put them in a situation where they're going to hurt themselves or hurt somebody else.
Yeah, back in the early 80s, there was probably some hazing going on, but nothing more than just,
character building.
Kind of breaking the people into the mold. Like, the Probie's the first one. After we have a meal, he's the first one in the sink doing the dishes. He checks that apparatus, from head to toe as soon as he gets in the morning. I mean, there's reasons for it, that you learn how to be part of the team. I've had so many friends whose sons became firefighters now who say they really, really saw a difference in their son or daughter that when they became a firefighter and took that responsibility, and it's a job and you're getting paid, but it's a dangerous job and has dangerous consequences, which I don't really care if people's feelings get hurt anymore. It's like, I don't want anybody dying on my watch.
I'd rather hurt your feelings than hurt you. Do you know what I mean? I'd rather talk to you really directly. There's times to flex your style, without getting into too much of the leadership style. When we're on station, we'll have a bit more of a discussion, we'll have a bit more of a chat. But when we're on the incident ground, I will at times point at you and say it very bluntly and very loudly, because the cost isn't you're going to break a dish in the sink. The cost isn't you're going to be 5 minutes late for parade. The cost might be your life. There's someone else's life. There might be, a structural collapse taking place. There might, you might lose control of that line because you weren't listening about the pressure I asked you to deliver through it. So I'm going to say it very directly. I'm going to say it very, very loud, and I might point at you when I do it because it's for a reason. It's knowing how to change gears, I suppose.
Exactly. I mean, that is the key to it. It's your Probie. You're responsible for them, and at the end of the day, we want them to learn their job, and we want them to go home to their families. And so I'm not going to apologize if we are a little rough around the edges with that.
I just want to sort of close the loop on that recruitment, just by asking number of women. How many women were part? So we're talking about 300 on your particular. Were there any women amongst that? Because there must have been. I mean, if there's 300 every couple of months, or you have 1,200 that year going through, the recruitment must have been thousands of people applying.
In the civil service in New York City, that is the hardest list to get on. To get on from. For the list might have been, let's see, 7,000 or 8,000 people. That might have been over 100,000 people taking that test. So it's a competitive exam. You take the written part, the physical part, they compile it. At the time, that was part of the problem why the list was delayed. I think there was a couple of lawsuits. My brother got on in 1983, and he wound up being in the first class of women that were entered into the FDNY. I think there was like 11 or 12 at that time. Wow. It's one of the things that the FDNY is trying to do. They're trying to recruit. They recruit through the military. They recruit through college sports to get people capable of doing the job. It's a physical job, but I've worked with a lot of women who can do the job. They train, they work hard, they're good athletes, or military trained, and they can do the job. But at that time, remember, early 80s, it wasn't. The FDNY probably did not handle it correctly at that time, but they tried to correct.
Yeah. We didn't know about them. We were operating from a very different mindset, and we've learned those lessons. We all not mistakes, but we all had a different idea about things at one point in time. When we were I did things when I was teenagers I wouldn't do now. Because my mindset is in a different place. I have a different perspective on life, and the FDNY, as much as brigades all over the world, and we had a different perception back then. So we're not going to beat each other over the head. We've learned from this, and we're clearly trying to move in a different direction. I love what you said about recruiting from military and other services and stuff like that. Could you speak to what is it about that sort of military and or service mindset that gives people similar values? How did you start being able to identify that these people are wonderful people to invest our time in recruiting?
I think over time, I think maybe with the military part, I think the discipline factor has kicked in, and I think you need to be disciplined as a firefighter, military. You need to be disciplined and follow directions when you're on the fire ground to ensure your safety. Even before my time, there was a lot of military people in. It was a natural segue into the first responder emergency service. Then when I got on back in like the late 70s and 80s, it seemed like there was a lot of college kids who they graduated college and they still want to join the fire service, which is fine. But, some of the workers in the fire department, you've always had plumbers, electricians. Unfortunately, you have to probably work 2 or 3 jobs in order to make ends meet, because even though we love being firefighters, they're not paying you a boatload of money.
That's it.
So 2 or 3 jobs, which I was all in. But we had a lot of people from the trades, construction workers, roofers, electricians, plumbers, and that's another segue into the fire service.
It does give us a real sort of rich diversity, though, and I see this in the UK and sort of, I know in America there's a lot of the voluntary sector of fire departments, not necessarily in the FDNY, but across the country, the voluntary sector is huge as well. And you get, or I personally feel like you do get a really great breadth of experience and a really diverse skill set because people work 2 jobs, 3 jobs and stuff like that. I mean, before we came on, and I know sort of in our conversations before we had this chat, that you spoke a lot about essential characteristics, and we've spoke about discipline being one of them from a military aspect. But I love what you said about this sort of the willingness to learn or help people. What do you feel from your sort of 35 years? What are those sort of key characteristics that you think of you've seen in the best firefighters that you've worked with?
First off, I think firefighters are doers. They want to get the job done. And from the officer point of view, sometimes they take certain risks in order to get the job done. the can-do attitude of a firefighter is you call them up at 3 o'clock in the morning for a problem. They have that can-do attitude. They want to solve that problem for you.
They're the master problem solver. It has to come from a really sincerely curious place that, you're turning up with a box of tools and you're like, we will find a way. We'll find a way. Keep working the problem. Working the problem
till we find a solution. Like, a water leak, you might say to somebody, well, how long has it been leaking? They called you at 3 in the morning and say, well, it's been leaking since about 2 days ago. Oh, so why are you calling us now? Well, the ceiling just collapsed, and now it's getting into the electrical outlet, and now we got to find a way to stop the water leak, and then maybe disconnect some electricity for them. I mean, we're almost like free trade workers in some ways,
Yeah.
And I always found, like, I worked a lot of times in some what we would call the ghetto neighborhoods back then, and unfortunately, those people don't have much. So when they call the fire department or the fire brigade, as you would say, they would be there and they would solve the problem and help them out.
I always say to people, you know why you call the police, and you know why you call for an ambulance. But for problems that you're not sure how to solve, you tend to call the fire department, and they turn up. They're a bunch of resourceful guys and girls. They've got a load of tools, and ultimately they've got a really unique mindset that they will find a solution, a safe system of work in some way or another to try and stem the problem or point you in the right direction.
I agree with that. Yeah.
So we've got master problem solver, we've got that disciplined aspect. You said about sort of learning, and I feel like this speaks a lot to yourself. Have you always been a curious learner, and does that sort of walk hand in hand with your development into higher roles, I suppose?
Well, I always put it into two different positions. In order to get promoted, you had to study material that were in the books. In order to learn what you had to do on the fire ground, you had to learn how to use your hands and your tools. So it's two different things. But in order to get promoted, you had to know the books. So, we used to say, oh, that guy, he's only book smart. He's not really good at the fire. But that does, that doesn't always work hand in hand. You can be book smart and be good with your hands in order to get the job done.
Is there an aspect of people that are better in a leadership? I mean, you said about, you work with firefighters that were far better firefighter than you. I often say to people, look, I wasn't the best firefighter. I feel like I'm a better crew commander than I ever was a firefighter, and my ambitions will be to be a better watch commander and further on than I ever was. And I'm sure I'll reach that ceiling where I get too far away from the boots on the ground. I don't necessarily at this point in my career have any aspirations to be a chief fire officer, because I just feel in a different mindset that I would, and I'm sure in 5-10 years I may feel differently, but I know my best skill set doesn't lie right at the coalface. As much as I enjoyed it, and I enjoy throwing a set on my back and going in there, I enjoy removing barriers for the people. Was there a point in your career where you felt like, you started to realize that you were the best way you could serve the people in the fire department was to continue to go up the ranks and less about being right at the sort of coalface?
I think when I reached the rank of captain and I finally had a command under my belt, I think that was my most rewarding time. Okay. And here I was responsible for 25 people in my unit, and you got to know each of them individually. You had your crew you work with, but you're also responsible for everything else. And I think you can make the biggest difference then in mentoring people and bringing them along, not only in the fire service, but in life too. You in the game of life, fire service, there's a camaraderie of the fire department is unbelievable. I'll give you one example. So I was selling a house. In order to sell the house, I had to put a roof on. So there was a guy in the fire service roofer, and I said to him, "Hey, Jimmy, do me a favor. I need a roof. Give me a price." He goes, "Okay, no problem." Unbeknownst to me, he goes out and he puts up in the firefighter's locker room, he puts Captain Melia's house Tuesday, Wednesday, we're doing his roof. So he shows up with all the firefighters, the 20 guys. They're on the roof. They're taking this down, taking that down, And I tried to. Nobody would take a dime. Of course, I fed them lunch. And then they might have had a cooler of some cold stuff at the end of the day. But I mean, that just shows you the camaraderie. So now what we did from that was we would do we called it a trio. Okay, you need a roof? We're coming over. Then 20 guys just show up in 2 days, you'd have a new roof.
But
the only thing
is it fair to say that sort of stuff comes from only having a sincere desire to get to know your team and get to know people, and the fact that no one joins the fire department because there's an expectation that everyone's going to come and put a roof on their house. Do you know what I mean? But if you join the fire department with an expectation to serve your team and be part of the culture and be willing to contribute more than put more into the system than you get back from the system. And that's where I personally feel like you start to hear these incredible stories about, Jimmy's daughter is trying to learn how to drive, and then one of the other firefighters is like, oh, look, we've got an old car sitting out around the back, and they just give it to her. And somebody's like, well, how's that? That's not fair. And you're like, look, you don't get it. You're not part of the culture. You're not part of the family. You don't know the lengths people will go to in this greater firefighter family to support each other.
The brotherhood and sisterhood is unmatched. I've never seen it. I experienced, my family's experienced it. I've never seen any other job that would have that same brotherhood. The police officers, they don't have that same, but I guess maybe it's part of being in a firehouse for 24 hours together. You get to know everything about everyone 24 hours, being with them for 24 hours. You know which parts to pick on, and that's where some of the practical jokes that we do come from,
Yeah. You said a lot about how well you get to know people and stuff like that, but I know before we came on, speaking about some of the setbacks, and you mentioned about one of the biggest aspects being, and I suppose it's the double-edged sword of the nature of the work that you do, but we do from time to time, have some tragedies within the fire department. I know that was one of your biggest setbacks from moving into a leadership position in the fact that we do lose people on the front line sometimes.
Yeah, the line of duty that is devastating to firefighters in the firehouse, devastating to the families of the firefighters, devastating to the job as a whole. I mean, that's the last part of my career when I became a safety chief. That was the part that I think I tried to make the biggest difference in. It's hard to explain the feeling that firefighters go through when they lose a member. In fact, 2 days ago, a volunteer fire in upstate New York was lost at a nursing home fire. There was a collapse, and unfortunately, a 34-year-old guy with 2 kids caught in the collapse and didn't make it out. So, and that's a volunteer. I know you briefed on volunteers before. Yeah. I live on Long Island, outside of New York City on Long Island, and it's all volunteers. And I praise the volunteers. They do it for free. This poor guy was working another job. He goes to a fire and he gets killed. I mean, it's
34 years of age, and that's young. Yeah. That is young. I mean, it's always difficult to hear. And my love, and I know everyone that's listening, my love will go out to the families. It's not as common as it used to be, and especially with the advances that we've seen in equipment and stuff like that, it gets harder to hear personally for me when the great work, from sort of the work you did and all people do behind the scenes in the fire departments to try and make the role as safe as possible. There's always going to be those aspects where ultimately we are heading towards the danger when everyone else is running away from it.
That is true. So, but I guess what we need to focus on is to try to make it as safe as possible for the members, and to take those necessary risks. If you pull up to a place, it's buttoned up, no one's in there, and it's 4:00 in the morning, we're still going to go in and put the fire out, but we're not going to take as much of a risk as if it's a occupied multiple dwelling with people hanging out the windows. We know we have a known life hazard. We're going to move towards that.
So when you started moving through into the position, and I mean, when you came out of the operational role, you'd reached level of chief fire officer for FDNY, which is, what does the day-to-day life of a chief, what does that role even entail? And that might sound like a stupid question, but what are the priorities when you're at that level? Because it must be an entirely different job.
But as a battalion chief, you're still out in the firehouse, so you're still dealing with the firefighters. You're going down for coffee in the morning, you're having breakfast, lunch, and dinner with the firefighters. You're still part of it. And then in the way it was set up as a battalion chief, you're charge of like 6 to 9 companies within your battalion. You would go over and visit with them, attend a drill. You're still responding with them. Like I said, I tried to mentor the officers, and I'd go and visit them, have a one-on-one talk with them, tell them what I expected out of them, and various paperwork. They're going on building inspection. You're going to go check up on building inspection and make sure there's any issues, they call you in, and then with your expertise and their expertise, we fill out the necessary paperwork.
It's a different role in terms of, like, say, mentoring people as well, like that. Do you see mentoring as much of a crucial role as it ever has been? Because, like you say, the career length of firefighters now isn't, from my experience, necessarily as long as it would, and the turnover sometimes in the fire department is rarer to find somebody that's been in for 20, 25 years who would perhaps be a great mentor unless they've already got in and they've started to rise through the ranks. You don't necessarily see as many firefighters in that long now.
At the FDNY, we still have firefighters that long. But again, it's anyone that's interested in their job and learning their job. So you could have 5, 6, 7 years on. You could be a mentor to that Probie. You could have 15 years on and be a mentor. 20 years on, you could be a mentor. But as company officer and chief officer, yeah, you might have to reach out a little more, especially after 9/11 when we were decimated by the towers. We had to rebuild, and a lot of people had to step up at that point and take on that leadership role from junior firefighters to junior officers and to even junior chief officers. I mean, I got promoted when I had 15 years to chief. I mean, that's kind of young at the FDNY. There was a lot of people in my boat. I got promoted in 1998, but that was only because you hit the tests the way they were. You don't know when they're going to give those civil service tests. So like every 4 years. So if you hit them right, you can go up.
What was one of the biggest changes you think you had to make? Because I want to get into, in fact, let's go there first. What was it like being operational during that period of time? Because that was a challenge. And I know you've done a lot of work since with the sort of National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. Has been a wonderful foundation that started. I'm going to put the links in the podcast and stuff like that. But what was the energy like during that period of time? And what was it like to be operational during one of the biggest tragedies that realistically FDNY has seen for their operational personnel?
It was kind of overwhelming at the beginning, and then we got settled up. So basically, the days following 9/11, either you were working in the firehouse, going down to what we called at the time the pile, or you were attending a funeral. That must have went on for 5 or 6 months. I mean, so I guess we realized that after a week that we probably weren't going to find anybody alive, but we also want to give the dignity of recovery. We worked down there 24/7 from then until almost June of the next year. So from September 11th to about June, I think, or maybe middle of May, we were operating 24/7 alongside the construction workers trying to recover as many of our bodies.
So what role were you playing there? Because 6 months trying to manage the setbacks and having to deliver news to families, whilst, I mean, the world still carries on. Just because there's been a tragedy, people will still need to be on the trucks. Right. People still need to be rolling out the doors.
If you were in the firehouse, like my battalion was in Bushwick, Brooklyn. My companies responded, and through almost a miracle, when the collapse came down, none of them were killed, luckily for my battalion. So when you were working your regular 24-hour shift, you just took care of the day-to-day business, because we still had to respond to fires all over New York City. We responded that day, the next day, the day after. And we lost a lot of fire trucks, we lost a lot of equipment, but we made do. We started rebuilding, and then what we would do is go down to the site on your off tours, or then we started doing like a month detail. So I was assigned to the task force for a month at a time. So I would leave my battalion, and I'd go and I'd work like 12 hours on, 12 hours off for a month.
I mean, we don't want to get too graphic about the process that had to take place, but I've been to a few structural collapses where we've recovered bodies, and it does become a point in time after a day or two when you realize it's body recovery. It's not a rescue operation anymore, and it can be very difficult to take on that role knowing that it is a recovery operation. How many were recovered?
Well, I don't have that number. I mean, I could find out for you the number, but unfortunately, not as many as we like. We didn't really ever find everybody that was killed that day.
Really?
So walk set up, and then what we would do is, if we found a fellow member, we get the Stokes out, and we do like a little ceremony marching out of the pit. We called it, and up a ramp, and everyone would stop and salute. It was heartbreaking, but to me, the reason we were down there doing it is we were trying to give the family some closure, so that they would have something to bury and, someone to bury.
Was there an aspect of, because this is something, I mean, no one's experienced anything like that on the same scale, but there's a very real aspect of survivor's guilt that I've come across when I speak to operational personnel where they've been at an incident where a firefighter or a police officer or even, operational personnel overseas in our military, when they survive an incident or when they survive something and unfortunately somebody else wasn't quite as lucky. Did you ever experience that? Was there anybody, and we're not going to name names or anything like that, but that aspect we weren't on shift that day, and that could have been me.
A perfect example is my brother who was working. He was a lieutenant in Engine 222 in Brooklyn. He was responding to the Trade Center. He was approaching the Williamsburg Bridge to go over to Manhattan, and he gets a call from the dispatcher to respond to the cause of Engine 216. Unfortunately, one of the senior men in 216 was out in the courtyard, and he was hit by a falling body or a jumper. And so we knew right away.
Hit by a jumper.
Yeah, right. He was the first one that we knew that died on scene. So the dispatcher's not knowing that when we have a fatality, send somebody to the quarters. We have notification cards, and you begin. So my brother basically was going to the Trade Center, and then they were redirected into the quarters of Engine 216, and he went to that quarters, and he stayed there the whole day. So I always felt over the years in discussions, never really sat down and talked to one, but I always felt that he had some survivor's guilt. And I've told him numerous times, in a way, we're lucky. You didn't lose any of your fellow firefighters from your company that day because of that, and the survivor's guilt. I've seen it where another time, unfortunately, we had the Atlantic Avenue fire where we lost two brother firefighters, and I was the captain of the company. I wasn't working. The collapse occurred about 8 o'clock. I got to the firehouse around 10 o'clock when I realized something was going on. And the guy who was supposed to be working that tour had made a mutual. And he came in, he was the officer. So the officer that got killed was working for him in the mutual.
Jesus.
And the guy came in and he started smacking things around, and I grabbed him and said, George, do me a favor. We need to go upstairs and address the firefighters. And let's go. I need you on my team with me. He calmed down. He was distraught because he said that should be me in there. And that's just kind of like the game of
that's the game,
firefighters play.
Yeah.
And I tried to explain to him. I mean, sometimes it's head, sometimes it's tail, and it wasn't your time this time.
Wow, I can't. I've luckily never been an incident where a member of operational personnel has lost their life, but it can happen to any of us any day. That's the beauty. I said it to a guest the other day that we're not at war. We don't work overseas where there is a human enemy, trying to tactically harm us. And we thank those that do work on the front line that do that for us. But I think our job in ways is different because it doesn't play favorites. Can be at any incident on any day, and if it's just not your day, everyone's there with the best of intentions, the best equipment. We're trying to look after each other. We're trying to tactically assess the risk and put preventative measures in place. But the incidents, the fire, it doesn't play favorites. It doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care if you have kids. It doesn't care if you haven't got kids. I always think there's something fascinating but scary about the dangers we face on the front line.
Yeah, I mean, it can change in an instant, just like that, where everything's going smooth, and then boom, and everything changes in a heartbeat. That's how I always explain it.
So, I mean, that kind of leads us nicely into what you then went into after your role as a chief as a safety officer. Now, some people look at safety and they think, oh no, it's the fun police. The fun police have come in, they're trying to stop us do our jobs, they don't get it. And that's the case sometimes. People who have not necessarily had a frontline career, maybe they went straight into a safety role from the public sector, but you were quite unique in that you had already operated on the front line for many, many years. How did you find yourself doing a safety role, and what made you want to go into that side of it?
It's a huge change going from being operational for 27 years and then all of a sudden being the safety guy. Like you're right. Like it was always be talk. Oh, here comes safety. Make sure you have all your gear on. Here comes safety. But at the end of the day, trying to change the safety culture in a fire service could be a full-time job. Me and my boss, I was the executive officer to the chief of safety, and we were responsible for 11,000 firefighters and about 3,000 EMS and EMTs, and trying to keep people safe. It's a scary job.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, if we don't do our job and we allow things to happen, what's the outcome is you go to a funeral, we give a nice funeral procession, and then we give a flag to a widow and say, thank you for your service, or a helmet to a widow. I mean, that's not what we want to do, so we want to try and limit. I always use the thing that you throw enough mud against the wall, sometimes it may stick. You have to lead by example. We didn't want to be the safety police. I was in the safety command. We didn't want to be the safety police. We wanted you to have buy-in that if you were safe, you can do your job safely. Yeah. We're not telling you not to go inside and put the fire out. That's what we get paid to do. We're supposed to protect life and property. Some property is unsavable, and so then maybe we don't commit somebody into a building. Yeah. The building's gone anyway. So.
Yeah. The most important thing is that 4, 6, 8 firefighters go out on the pump and they all come back on the truck. If we can save some life while we're there, if we can save some property, fantastic. If we can't, that's okay. We went, we did our best. Everybody went there and everybody came back safely. That is sometimes all we're able to do. We can't save every property. We can't save every life. It's not a sustainable exchange to be swapping a firefighter's life for a member of the community. As much as we all want to go out there and do the best we can do, we have to temper our enthusiasm sometimes, and that I imagine is one of the hardest things. So what were some of the biggest or some of the most challenging aspects of safety? Because we've spoken a little bit around exposure levels, the chemicals that we're facing against. What were some of the things you enjoyed trying to remind firefighters of? Kind of leads into your role, I suppose, with PBI. What were some of the things you thought, as I'm now in this safety role, I'd love to make a difference with this, because this is something I've experienced for 20 years and I feel like we can do it differently.
Well, one of the things we did was after a line of duty fatality, we have an internal investigation team that produces a report. And I can get you a few copies of them, and it's pretty comprehensive. And one of the opportunities you get is you do a section called findings. What happened at this fire? Yeah. And then we had some recommendations to counteract some of the bad things that happened. We might change our procedures. We might change our gear. we can host a lot of it, unfortunately, was reinforce this and reinforce that.
We have similar things to that, and I apologize for interrupting you, but I wanted to ask, how much did you find people were willing to engage in that process? Because I have sometimes, I've participated in these sort of things quite a lot, and some people can worry about them, like it might be an opportunity for somebody to beat them over the head, or like they're going to get a disciplinary from it. But it takes a real change in mindset for people to realize that this is a healthy process. This is not about telling people off. This is not about disciplining people. This is about us collectively trying to come up with a safer way to approach it. Did you find firefighters and because you've been there, and I imagine you filled these in before you were in the safety role. So did you ever have any challenges with people being willing to contribute what their actions were, because maybe people made mistakes?
Well, I think it's the whole safety culture. I always use it as this: we want to prevent it next time. The reason that I'm going to spend 4 to 6 months coming out of the fires to investigate is because we want to find what happened to Billy, John, Joe, whoever it is, and we want to prevent it next time. We owe it to the member, we owe it to his family, and we owe it to the organization and ourselves. We can't, it's not your duty to get killed at a fire. No. And if it happens, which is going to happen, we want to limit the amount of firefighters killed. I mean, we did a study, and I used to teach a class, and I'd show how many firefighters got killed from the time I was on the job until when I was teaching the course. And we used to average almost 6 or 7 firefighters a year, and now we're down to like 4.5. But then my last slide is 4.5 good? No, 4. That's not good. So we have to strive to 0. We know it's not going to happen, but we want to eliminate the ones we can. And by and large, we're not putting anybody up before a stenographer and saying it's a conversation between a chief officer and a firefighter and what happened there. What we have also done at the FDNY is we included the unions in it because we want to get the union support so the firefighters feel like their rights aren't being. And listen, if it's a criminal thing, we're not going to get involved. Yeah. And most often it's not a criminal thing. It's a firefighter gets killed or collapsed. Maybe the building wasn't built right. Maybe we can change the building code so this doesn't happen again. Or maybe the nozzle didn't operate correctly, or whatever the case might be. But my thing, I also preach them is, if we can't investigate ourselves, who's going to investigate us? There's public agencies like OSHA and stuff like that will do it. But I think it's better coming from an internal. I felt like I had a chance to make some recommendations that I want to see how the fire service changed. And that was one of my recruitments when I tried to get other chief officers to come on board for the investigations. Here's your chance to change the job for the better. And we all sit in the kitchen and we can complain about this and we complain about that. But now maybe we have the opportunity to change something for the better.
I suppose it's such a unique opportunity because there'll be people that do go through 20, 30 years and they see changes, but never necessarily have an opportunity to be a really pivotal role in implementing them. And it's kind of like, I don't know, I'm hearing that it's kind of like you did 25, 30 years of learning, and then you kind of closed the loop at the end and went, right, now what's the change I want to make? How am I going to leave this department better than when I found it?
Right. That's one of your goals. And you have to also make recommendations that are doable. At the beginning, when I first started, I probably did about 10 line of duty investigations for firefighters, which takes a toll on you because, it's a tough thing to be that Monday morning quarterback. It's tough to go in and talk to you as the company officer after you just lost your best friend or your mate or your Probie. You know what I mean? And, it's tough. And, it's tough to have those conversations, but I think they're necessary so that we can make the job better, like you said, when we leave it.
That's got to be such a unique conversation because whenever you have that conversation, it's always going to feel like it's too soon. Do you know what I mean? You turn up and you're like, guys, my deepest sympathies, my deepest condolences. It's horrific what's happened. If anybody needs some more time, of course, but I've got some questions. We need to have this conversation. I want to make sure that if there is a lesson to be learned, I don't want to come here again next week because you were next, because we didn't learn this lesson.
Right.
Because you could get a call later today. You could get a call right now. If we don't learn this lesson now, they must have been some really difficult conversations.
Yeah, it's hard. I probably conducted over 300 or 400 or 500 interviews of members, and
wow,
they never are the same. Over the course of the time that I was involved in safety, and it's never easy, and you have to give that person your full attention, and they're suffering, and we try to get information as soon as possible if we can, if the person's up for it. If they're on the medication or things like that, they're not mandated to talk to us. We want them to voluntarily talk to us. Nothing worse than a safety chief coming in with a white shirt on and saying, but no, that's not what it's all about.
You are contractually obliged. You need to have this conversation with me we're paying your wages. You need to sit down and I need to have a conversation. You don't want to be going about it that way.
No, we want them to get buy-in that if we're ever going to change it, if we're going to prevent that next time. And nobody really argues that, and pretty much everybody is on board. Sometimes right after the fire is not the time, but you'd be surprised how many people actually want to talk to you and tell their story. It's almost like a cleansing for them to get that out. Because
it allows them to rationalize it. They can go through it in their mind and they can go, well, you know what? First we did this and I saw it developing in that compartment, and then I spoke to my incident commander, I spoke to the boss and he saw this, or Alpha team saw that, and it allows them to process it and go through what was my thought process. Did I make the right decision? Well, actually, no, I did. I made that decision because I saw this. I wasn't aware the back end of the room had blown open or it had ventilated. So, no, yeah, it's a very therapeutic, I imagine.
Yeah, and one of the reasons you want to get it, and it's not because the members are going to tell you information that's different, but we don't want to. I use the word contaminated sometimes. Like, it's not what Billy or Johnny saw; it's what you saw and what you did at that particular fire, and let's go from there. And then we try to piece together it's almost like a puzzle, unfortunately. Yeah. And you try to piece together the pieces and find out what happened. But I don't think our guys lie, and I don't know about you, but after I would go to a fire, I would drive home. By the time I pulled into my driveway home, what I did at that fire was completely different than what was in my drive.
Yeah. We have a mental bias, don't we? And you hear this because our mind is fantastic at filling in blanks. It doesn't like things that it doesn't know, so it fills in blanks and it goes, you said, we will come off this call today and we go, Pete, you had a chat with Dan today. What did you think about it? And you go, X, Y, Z, we spoke about this or that. And you go, where was he? And you'll go, I think he was at home. What was he wearing? I don't know, he was wearing a jacket over there. And we go, nope, he was wearing a blue t-shirt. You go, where was he? Uh-huh. Well, I remember he was talking about the fire. He was in his office. Nope, he wasn't. He had a wall behind him. And you go, he had a wall? No, I remember he was inside. Yeah, he was inside, but he had a brick wall behind him. And these are the things you allow your mental bias to fill in so many blanks. And it's not, that's where people can get scared because they feel like you're going to say, well, no, Pete, you were lying. And you go, well, no, I wasn't lying. That's how I remembered it. I thought so-and-so said we're going on a left-hand direct search. That's what I recall. And then we just headed left. Well, no, the paper said it was a right-hand search. And you're like, oh. Yeah,
and actually one of the things that we always asked for after an investigation was to record the handy-talkie transmissions. We were able to do that, so now we record all handy-talkie transmissions. But guess what? We've learned that not all transmissions that are given wind up on a handy-talkie recorder. So you can't assume different things. And it was like early on, it's like, oh, we got it here. But if the incident commander or if the nozzle person or if the roof man didn't hear the transmission, then it never occurred.
Absolutely. I love this when we're training. So in the UK, a lot of, because we only have sort of 4 personnel on the crew, the driver will often be the command support. They'll be the operator that sends all the messages back to our main control or something like that. And they can at times, through the best of intentions, try and fill in the blanks of the commander's instructions. So they'll put a message back and they'll go, put me an informative back. This is a building consisting of 3 floors. I've sent 2 breathing apparatus in, left-hand direct, whatever. And they're trying to make notes. They've got the pump raring in the background, and they're not quite sure what they said, but they've got a rough idea. And that's where the confusion can start, because you fill in the blanks that I thought you meant this, because where I was sat, it looked like it was 2 floors. And you go, well, yeah, but you couldn't see the basement. So if I say 3 floors, send 3 floors. Yeah, doesn't matter what you think it is. And this is not, this is where you're not being combative, but I'm like, if I say 3 floors, you put 3 floors. I don't care if you think it's 1. I don't care if you think it's 6. Just put what I say, because then that was my decision at the time. I saw 3 floors. Funny story is,
at the FDNY, we have a battalion aide who's your driver, and he makes the transmissions back to dispatch. So I get to a fire, the guys are making a push, the aide comes up and he goes, you want me to get a report? I said, give them a second, because they were making a room, so you could see them coming through the apartment. So I was confident that they were going to get that last room at 5 p.m. So he goes, okay, he walks, he was a new aide, and he was just we call him a covering aide, or backup aide. So he goes out and he transmits a second alarm. So when I said, give me a second, I meant, give me a second let's just let them make this room communication. I turned around like 5 minutes later, the fire's out, and I see the deputy chief come up and he goes, what do you want to do with the second alarm units? I go, did you transmit a second? He goes, no, you did. And then I said, oh, okay. I think we got it, chief. It was funny. I mean, I experienced that one time. It's like, that makes you want to just communicate better. You know?
Yeah. You go, look, I'm sure that's what you heard. This is what I meant. So my mistake, because that's it. You can quickly point a finger. What you think you said and what I heard may be two very different things.
Right. And those things, like, you know, again, like if an accountant makes an error, so what, you lose a couple $1,000. If we make an error, we can lose a life, you know.
Exactly. So the cost is very different. I mean, we've gone through so much stuff there. I love that. And I know we've got some chats and stuff we want to have in the future, but you've been able to do something really unique with your career, is that when people do 25, 30 years, they stay in the job often, and you sort of referred to it earlier, because we love it so much. And sometimes you get indoctrinated into the system and people aren't sure perhaps what life looks like after the fire department. But, you know, some time ago, you began working with PBI. This company's been around for so long and such an integral part of the fire department. How did that come about, and what made you want to begin working with them?
So basically for me I was asked by the chief of safety to be on an NFPA committee, National Fire Protection, and they were making this, and it was on the ones for standards for fire gear, bunker gear. I'm like most firefighters. You gave me the gear, I wore it worked, I never complained, I did it. So here I am. So the FDNY has a seat at the table for the NFPA. It's the third manufacturers, a third scientist, and a third firefighter. So here I am representing 11,000 firefighters and probably 300,000 across the North America. And I go to my first meeting. I said to my boss, what have I got to do? I'm the author. He goes, no, don't worry. You don't do anything. So he can't make a meeting. I go to the meeting. I was never so embarrassed as not knowing what I was supposed to be doing. Here I am voting for all my members on important stuff. You know, the next set of standards, where we're going to be in the future. I was embarrassed. So I went back and learned as much as I can. I met a lot of people in the industry. And when I was getting ready to retire, PBI, which makes a fiber that's in an outer shell, you either wear Nomex and Kevlar, basically you wear a PBI Kevlar. Mm-hmm. And the FDNY had been in the PBI from 1994. We had what we call the Watt Street fire, when Mayor Giuliani asked John Drennan's wife, Vina Drennan, what can I do for you guys? She said, get these guys bunker gear, get them better gear. Because her husband basically, they got caught above a fire, and he spent 40 days and 40 nights in the burn center with severe burns and succumbed to his injuries. So the FDNY fast-tracked a pilot program to get bunker gear. The head of that task force was Ray Downey, very famous New York City firefighter. Unfortunately, he got killed on 9/11, but he was the captain of Rescue 2 at the time, our most elite unit. He was in charge of when Oklahoma City got bombed. He was on a team also. They sent him out there. He ran the whole show. Ray Downey was the real deal. He was like a firefighter's firefighter, a chief. They selected a PBI fiber back then, and it kind of put PBI back on the map in 1994. Fast forward 2014, I was on a PPE committee for the FDNY to select what our next composite was going to be going forward, and we never even considered any other outer shell than a PBI fiber, a PBI Kevlar. So right when I was getting ready to retire, I was approached by a guy named Brian Bolden, who's now my boss, and he asked me if I wanted to come to work for PBI, and I hadn't really thought about it much, and I said, I'm just getting out of I was on call for the last 8 years, 24/7. I respond to every major. I said, I'm not looking for to take anything too major on. He goes, well, we only have a part-time position available. Very smart move by him. And it was the first time that PBI was hiring somebody from the fire service. Why are they hiring me? Because I'm a salesperson? I don't think so. I think they'll hire me because, first of all, I wore the gear and I believed in it. And now I've been working on it for 4 years. He loved it. It keeps me involved in the fire service. I get to attend FDIC institutes. I get to attend major conferences. And I, as being a firefighter and still want to learn, I always go in and sit in on the lectures and talk to people. And it keeps me, I would say, in the game, so to speak.
It's such a strange and authentic blend because, like you say, you've been there, you've worn it, you've seen the safety inspections of firefighters that aren't wearing the best bunker gear out there. So I suppose more for you, more than anything, you see the cost of, with all due respect, lesser brands. If we're really going to look at safety as being the number one priority for our operational personnel, then it really gives you a wonderful bit of authenticity, like I say, to make sure that you are championing something that you believe in, that you've worn, and know that it does what it says on the tin.
Right. It makes it easier for me. It's something I believe in. I don't feel like a salesperson. I just feel like I wore it, and we investigate every burn injury at the FDNY, and I can say with great sincerity that a outer shell with PBI will give that firefighter a better chance of survival in a catastrophic event. And hopefully we don't get into that catastrophic event. But if we do, instead of being burned to death, maybe only have second or third degree burns.
And that's not a sales pitch. That's backed up by science. That's backed up by testing. That's what I love about PBI. The conversations I've had with them and Ian and stuff is because it's so uncomfortably true. it's not a sales pitch, it's just fact. The testing has been done, and I appreciate the frustration from other brands who would like to find something that will one day perhaps outperform it, but this is simply not the case at the minute.
Right. And I make no apologies for that. It is what I consider, and again, at the end of the day, when I was on the PPE committee, and even as a chief officer, or even as a consultant with PBI, is you have to put your head on that pillow and know you made the best decision based on the facts that you have.
That's it.
And that's at the end of the day, I think, I guess in life you have to go through that.
100%. So before we go down, so your dad had been in for such a long time, you'd been through all of your basic training. What was it actually like when you first went into the job? You know, you'd arrived at an incident and you were straight in there and you actually got to, you know, do the job hands-on. What was the first incident you attended where you were on the nozzle?
First of all, my first 2 tours in the firehouse were Christmas Eve and Christmas night. I came out of Probie school. I went in November. I got out December 22nd and reported to the firehouse. Captain said, "Oh, you're working Christmas Eve and Christmas night." And that's part of being in the fire department. You have to work.
And you don't, when you first into the job, you don't mind that. I remember when I first got into the job, I was working all the bank holidays. I worked all of, because you just wanted to get those jobs. You wanted to get the first job. You wanted to, out of all the recruits, you wanted to be the one that got the first job.
Right. So several weeks after that, I was assigned a nozzle position. We're driving down a block, and actually we weren't even called to the scene, but we see a heavy brownish smoke pushing out top floor of a 6-story walk-up.
Wow.
So the captain bangs on the window, goes, "We got a job." So that you're in the back of the rig, you start pulling your boots up and you get your mask. So we go back, we start stretching lines. So now it's my first time on the nozzle, and I'm trying to get up the stairs. I had this old crusty captain. He was like 6'4". He was tough as nails, and he was salty. I'm going up the stairs with my folds on my arm to get to the top floor, start flaking the hose out.
You say six?
He's ahead of me. 6'4" walk-up. Now,
wow.
This guy, you know, he was probably about 55 years old, this guy at the time. He had 30 years in, always worked in busy places. So I'm trying to get by him. He goes, "Kid, take it easy. The fire will be there when we get there." I said, "Okay, Cap." So, but he was smart. He was conserving his energy. So when we get up to the top floor, we could mask up. So we get up to the top of the floor, we start moving in. He kind of walked me through the whole thing, you know. "Go ahead, kid, move in. Go ahead. Hit it to your left, shut down, move in some more." He walked me through the whole thing. But I never forget the feeling I had, like after that fire was out, and you walk down to the street, and you wanted to pat yourself on the chest and say, "I just put that fire out." That was my first time, and like it's 40 years later. I still never forget that feeling or that moment. The adrenaline of being a firefighter. I don't have it anymore, but it is what it is.
Yeah, it never leaves you being that front line in. I wanted to make sure I didn't miss an opportunity, because we get so many messages in the Firefighters podcast from loads of different countries about, you know, well, I've been listening to it and I love the fire department. I'm going to start applying when I'm 19, when I'm 20. So when I'm in a position, somebody such as yourself with so many more experiences, both in breadth and years than me, I wanted to ask you, what are some of the advice you would give? Imagine if you bumped into yourself when you first joined the fire department, or, you know, your siblings, what advice would you give them that says, "Dan, I'm looking to join the fire department. What do you think I need to spot up on? What do you think I need to read up on?"
Well, I guess the first thing I'd probably say to them is research what a firefighter is all about. You know, you can research it online, or you can talk to people, talk to other firefighters who've been on there, research what it's all about. Then you want to make a commitment to being the best firefighter you can be.
Okay.
By that, I mean you want to develop your trade. You want to learn your trade, develop both book knowledge and practical skill knowledges. If you're learning how to use a saw, learning how to force doors, and whatever it takes, you want to learn that. And probably the best piece of advice I can say as a firefighter in 2021 is you have to stay in great physical shape. You have to be able to run up that 6 flight of stairs and then operate and put that fire out. Yeah. And you don't want you not being in shape cause either you or one of your comrades to get injured, right? And now that I'm on the other side, I want you to wear your protective gear correctly. There's a reason that the gear is worn that way, and sometimes we cut corners to get the job done, and I did the same thing.
Yep.
And then the other thing at the end is wash that gear. You know, we've learned that in the last 5 years. Wash your gear, wash your gear, wash your gear.
Yeah, man.
I think in Europe, you're doing it better than the American Fire Service. Together as a group. Yeah. Oh, okay.
We're not great, you know, because you're right. We idolize, you know, I see pictures of yourself or firefighters from 20 years ago, and it's, you know, there's something about having a dirty helmet. You know, you've got soot on the jacket. You've been in a fire. It was 2 tours ago, and you still haven't put it in for wash. We need to get out of that idea that clean kit means you're a lazy firefighter. That's not the case at all. And, you know, walking around with your tunic open, not wearing your flash hood, all this sort of stuff, it's not cool. And we need to get out of that mindset that dirty gear means you're a hardworking firefighter. It doesn't. The professional firefighter now looks after their gear. It wears it as it's intended. You put it in for wash. It should be clean every tour. Every operational firefighter should have at least 2 sets of operational gear, at least 2 sets of bunker gear. There's no excuse. Put it in for wash. You need a third set, request a third set, put an improvement in place that means you get the right stuff when you need it.
Right. We have a saying, we made posters, we posted them in the medical office and the different firehouses. Clean is the new salty. So you have a salty firefighter picture and then you have a clean firefighter. And for the protection of you and your family, clean is the new salty. I kind of like that.
I like that. You're right, because otherwise I remember when I first joined, coming home and I'd sit down at the lunch table with my kids and they'd be like, oh, Daddy, you smell smoky. Do you know what I mean? Oh, yeah, well, Daddy's been in a fire. Right, well, that's not cool. Because you think it is back then, but the harm I was doing, and I feel annoyed, a little bit. Don't want to get upset about it, but sitting next to my children and giving them a hug when I've still got all of that all over me. Wash your kit, have a shower, be a professional. You don't have to stink of smoke to prove you're a firefighter.
Right, throwing your gear into the trunk of your car, and then you put your kid's stroller in the car. That makes no sense to me. So, no, but back then we really didn't think about it. We're aware of it, so now we take the action.
That's it. We know better, so we've got to do better. Love it, Dan. Thank you so much for taking time out of your business.
Okay, good.
Man.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Hope I didn't talk too fast.
Not at all, mate. I've got a terrible habit of getting too excited and I interrupt people. So I know I interrupted you 2 or 3 times today. So I apologize for that.
No, I think that's part of the conversation. I think that works well. I've listened to a few of your podcasts now. You do a great job with them. So.
Thank you, brother. I really appreciate it. Send my love to the family. Maybe I'll get over there and see you when all the pandemic closes out.
If I get over there, I'm going to have to look you up. Tell Ian to invite me over there.
I will do, mate. We need to get everybody together. I'm sure we will. All right, brother. Good. Take care of yourself, and I will see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, everybody, that was my chat with Dan Melia, former Chief Officer, FDNY, firefighter, company officer, safety officer, PBI ambassador, and friend of the podcast. I took so much away from my chat today. It was really impactful, actually quite emotional for me at times. I had to sort of take a second as I was listening back to some of the recording that, the work he's done with the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. We didn't speak too much about that there, but this is a really impactful and powerful foundation that does such a crucial role supporting operational personnel and their families in the tragic events that still happen these days when we do lose an operational firefighter. We spoke a lot about the tragic events of 9/11 and how in his operational role, Dan was part of that, and that was just really surreal to listen to that. I can't imagine what it was like to be part of the recovery operation as well as being part of the fire department during one of the most challenging times in its history. Now, whilst a firefighter always remains a firefighter, it's rare to find somebody that's able to carve out a way, even after their operational career is finished, to continue to add value to the service. So I want to send thank you again to PBI for making this happen, for connecting the podcast with Dan, a really inspiring guy. I took so much away from it. I really look forward to the day where we're able to sit down and get a drink together and hear even more, to learn, to develop myself from sharing that experience, from sharing that knowledge accumulated over 35 years in the job. Because we should never stop learning, folks. I always say that the world belongs to the eternal student. No matter where you go, no matter what you do, you can never stop learning. There are always those pockets of the services where experience, knowledge, insights, habits, behaviors, techniques can accumulate in the minds of these incredible people just like Dan. And it's my privilege to be able to bring them onto the podcast and share their stories with you. I hope you take something big away from today's episode. I hope you'll join me in thanking our operational personnel who were there on 9/11. And I hope, just like me, you acknowledge that not every firefighter that we lose is as a result of something as newsworthy as the 9/11 attacks. But to know that no matter where they are in the world, our thanks goes out to all operational personnel, police, ambulance, military, fire department, people that are willing to risk their own safety to protect their communities. Thank you for your time today. Thanks for coming back to the Firefighters Podcast. We do not take your time for granted. If you want to support the podcast, you can do so with some of the links below. If you want to find out when the next episodes are dropping, be sure to jump on the links below as well. If you want to delve further down the rabbit hole of the Firefighters Podcast, then take a look in the notes below. And stay tuned, stay up to date, stay curious, stay happy, stay healthy, stay hungry for knowledge, for experience, for the opportunity to share in some of these incredible stories. So until next time, look after yourself, and I look forward to seeing you again real soon, right here on the Firefighters Podcast.